Welcome to the Aid Station. I'm Chris Robb, and today we head over to London to meet Sam Renouf, who's the CEO of the Professional Triathletes Organisation. Great to see you, Sam.
Likewise, Chris. Good to talk again. It's been a while.
It has been a while, and it's been some interesting times for you, and I guess you'll share with us a little bit later, but you're the first person on the Aid Station to have officially had COVID-19, so be interested to hear
right?
that story. Yeah, the first one.
That's a badge of honor.
Yeah, so we'll hear a little bit about that, but love to start with a little bit of the Sam Renouf story, a bit of your background, please.
Oh, happily. We'll keep it nice and short because I think the story for me is the athletes rather than us that organize the activities behind it. I've been in the endurance space for 20 years, I guess, on and off. Started out as an athlete, not a very good athlete, a journeyman pro, I describe myself. Was on the British team for university at Loughborough University, which is quite a well-known school for anyone who's done sport. I'm sure many people who've been on your interviews the last couple of months have come through Loughborough. Retired at the ripe old age of 21 because I realized that my athletic muscles maybe weren't quite as strong as the academic muscles, or more specifically, the banter. And was very lucky to get a career in sports. I actually started in banking briefly, but quickly realized that aligning passions with work is the easiest way to succeed. And it's something I've always sort of recommended to people who now ask me how to get ahead in life. Go and find something you can be super passionate about and it never feels like work, right? Certainly not. I'm not the first person to say that, but managed to convert that into a fun career in sports. I spent best part of 10 years at Active Network, or active.com, as I'm sure many of your viewers will know the business, over in Asia, where of course we met the first time. It's maybe 8 years ago. So I had the great experience of setting up Active first in Europe, then in Asia, and then got the tap on the shoulder and worked in the States. We did a management buyout. We took Active private. It was a publicly listed company, took it private, kind of restructured it, and 3 years later sold it in a private equity deal. So that was my first chapter. Then briefly involved in, I decided to get into the harder side of events, which is actually putting them on. So having sold software to event organizers for so long, thought I should learn, the trials and tribulations. Realized quite how difficult that was.
And you're clearly a quick learner because you didn't stay too long in that space. So quicker learner than me.
18 months, 18 months. So it was a roll-up business. We acquired 20 different events in about 2 years in a roll-up called Motive, including the Sydney Marathon, Malibu Triathlon, Wildflower Triathlon, which was a great business, really interesting learning lesson for me. And actually that led directly into what I'm doing now, because we were investing in a bunch of different event properties. And one of the groups that came to ask for investment was the Professional Triathletes Organization. And I remember distinctly sitting down in London, meeting the founder for the first time, talking about the business model, thinking, wow, this is really what the industry needs, or more specifically, the sport that I love needs, because I really came from triathlon, but it wasn't the right fit for Motive. And so, because we were an age group business and this is professional, so I said to them, hey, look, I think this is a good model. Why don't let's take a risk? And I left Motive. We didn't have any funding at the time. We raised money, and then we launched in January this year. So that's really been my path to now.
Wow, what a great story! Great story. And you were talking before that there's not too much, obviously, like everyone. You're sitting at home. You're dealing with it remotely. What's life currently? As I say, in the intro, you're the first person I've interviewed, and in fact one of two people that I know that have had COVID-19. You and your wife Kat had it. How was it, and how did it impact you?
Yeah, it's certainly the badge to have, right? In fact, I don't know anybody else that's had it either, frankly. And the reason I had it sounds unique, is my wife's a surgeon, so she's on the front line. She's in the full PPE get up each day. And it was within 48 hours of her going back to work in a COVID hospital that we immediately got sick. So it showed quite how easy it was to catch it. And look, we were very lucky, as you said earlier, both relatively young, both relatively fit, still doing lots of sport. So no preconditioning issues that it had. So we were through it within about a week. But I tell you, it was a week of being sideways on the sofa, incapable of really thinking properly. And that's when I remember when we were first going to do this aid station. I think I was one of the first people we were chatting about getting on, and I was like, Chris, I can't handle an interview right now. Yeah. So yeah, that wasn't much fun. That's about a month or so ago. But yeah, more specifically to dealing with COVID and the time. Obviously, we launched the PTO in January of this year. We were just ramping up to do our first major event. Would have been this weekend. In fact, it would have been this Sunday in Samarin. And of course, no one saw COVID coming. So within 2 months, we had to put pens down and sort of reassess, as everybody else has, which has been interesting to say the least.
Yeah, and then in about that time, apart from being on the sofa, things are now starting to open up. I think we were on WhatsApp yesterday. You've been getting out and about on the bike, and beautiful weather in London is social distancing doesn't seem to be happening from the pictures I've seen, and it's kind of almost contradictory, isn't it? We're sitting in this event industry wanting to get mass participation events back, and you're seeing people swarming beaches and running in parks and whatever. Is that what you're seeing out there? There's this massive appetite, and people are less afraid of the social distancing issue in exercising?
So I would certainly say, I mean, on the day-to-day, everyone's at home, right? So I'm at home all day long. And it's been something to really adapt to. Obviously, talked about my career before. I was used to flying hundreds of thousands of miles a year. I was barely in one place at one time. Almost any time we spoke, it was when I was in an airport.
Yeah.
So adapting to not being on a plane was quite an interesting, different environment. I think speaking to the UK, everybody is still at home and very cautious, but for sure getting bored of the situation and beginning to maybe stretch it. But I say that even as you run for a park, everyone avoids everyone. You sort of get in a situation, if you run too close to somebody, they get really quite upset. The Richmond Park, which is the famous spot for cycling here, is closed for cyclists still.
Okay.
So, there's still this dynamic that I would say we're still very much in lockdown. Now, on the positive side, and I chatted to a few folks about this, certainly in the UK, and I hope everywhere, such a boom in athletic and outdoor exercise. And the amount of people, I live quite close to a running trail here, and we sit in the evenings, and it's just streams of people, far more than we've ever seen before. So hope that might be some small silver lining for the industry, that coming out of this, more people have spent time, not necessarily going to the gym or playing football, but out running and out cycling, and hopefully that correlates to more, activity and mass participation endurance.
Yeah, certainly that's what I'm hearing right across the board. Everywhere I'm interviewing people, there's so many people out there, and lots of families as well. So hopefully some generational impact as well as we move forward. So moving on to the challenges in the business. Obviously you launched a new business, great vision, great ideas, funding. What have been some of the challenges? I mean, you're a fairly small organization, so I'm assuming you haven't had to lay off a whole lot of staff and so on. But what have been some of the challenges you've faced during this time, Sam?
So we've had quite a unique challenge, right? I imagine most of the people you've spoken to haven't sort of gone through this, in that, like anybody, we were building up. We were just at the point where was it? It was about, I think we were 88 days, and I had a day counter at home on when the Collins Cup, our first event, was taking place. So I knew each day how long we were to launching. And we were always doing that under pretty short time periods. Frankly, we were behind the gun. Like launching in January for an event 5 minutes later of the scale we were doing was always putting us slightly on the back foot. So there was an advantage there to have a bit more time. But in sitting down and sort of assessing what do we do about the Collins Cup, when do we move it to, we quickly realized that actually the biggest problem wasn't ourselves or the event, it was all of the athletes. Because we're, of course, an athlete body, and we were looking at this and saying, well, if there are no races, that means there's no prize money, which means essentially all of the athletes that are all athletes that are self-employed immediately were becoming unemployed. And I don't know about your part of the world, but certainly the government stimulus programs don't extend to professional triathletes, nor indeed any athletes, right? It's an example of, right? It's a segment that slipped through the net. So we actually quickly spoke to our investors and decided that we would provide stimulus. Essentially, we would step in. And so we had already planned on, at the end of the year, paying world rankings based on everyone's performance, a bit like in tennis, you have the FedEx rankings, and in golf, you have the Rolex rankings, which, depending on what you do, we have the same. We have the PTO rankings. We actually accelerated that and paid it immediately. So we paid $2 million out within a week of canceling the Collins Cup to the athletes that are ranked in the top 1 through 50. And then with the support of our investors, Crankstart actually extended it. So we got an additional $500,000 and paid all the way down to the top 100 athletes. Wow. Was important for us because we recognized that for many of those athletes, they wouldn't be professionals much longer, right? I mean, they'd either have the dole or give up the sport. And so we're able to provide a little bit of relief to get through the time. So that was, I would say, the biggest challenge for us wasn't necessarily a challenge directly to our organization, but more to the industry and how will we overcome that.
And those athletes are now presumably, trying to keep fit indoors on turbo trainers and running on treadmills and the like. And I guess the biggest challenge in this whole thing is where's the finish line, or the new start line, better than the finish line, but where's the new start line? So mentally for them, potentially challenging, not knowing when they're necessarily going to race again.
Totally. I mean, really interesting dynamic that no one saw coming, right? Obviously, nobody saw this, and especially even if you look at, we're mainly focused on the long distance athletes, but many of our athletes will race in the Olympic Games. So to have that huge, I mean, monumental impact of this thing that you've built up with for over 4 years suddenly pushed out. Yeah, a real I could use expletives to refer to what it would impact people, but I won't. I'll be good and not say what I think about what it would probably felt like, but a tough situation to deal with, certainly, for sure. Now, and the interesting dynamic, I'm not a coach nor am I an athlete anymore, but to think through those that treat this as an amazing opportunity, and I was chatting about this actually on a call this morning, about those that now know they've got 12 months extra. Do they go away and focus 100% on a strength and really come back a completely different athlete, or do they take their foot off the gas because long-term health and mental health means you can't really be pushing to the pedal all the time? I think it'll be really interesting to see how different athletes from different programs come back, as indeed we're seeing with football, that is one of the first sports, with soccer, I should say, for the global audience, of coming back earlier, but of course some of the athletes not being fit enough yet, and then immediately getting injured, as we saw at Bundesliga last weekend. So, I mean, so many different dynamics that none of us expected to have to deal with.
Yeah, absolutely. And in terms of creating that start line, you launched a new event in Daytona a couple of weeks ago. Remind me of the date of when that's scheduled for.
Yeah, so that's December 4th and 5th. So basically the first weekend of December, and it was kind of nuanced, really. We were struggling in this environment with what do we do, right? So we've got the scenario, we postponed the Collins Cup by a year, and so that's not taking place until this weekend in a year's time, so May the 21st, 2021.
Yeah.
But we still recognize that we would like, if possible, to create an opportunity for the athletes to come together and race, because that's really what the PTO is all about. I mean, triathlon has grown hugely over the years, but the professional aspects of the sport have not grown at the same rate as the age group or the participation. And in fact, if you do it on a percentage basis, on an inflation adjusted basis, prize money is dramatically lower than it was even 10 years ago. So despite revenues, sponsorship, numbers all growing hugely, the professional, if you deem how much they get paid as a reflection of their value, has dropped a lot. And so that's really why the PTO was formed, was to right that wrong, and ultimately create opportunities where we could get the best athletes racing together. Because one of the byproducts of having low prize money in the space means that there's never really an incentive for the best athletes to get together. Frankly, the only time all year long is Kona, where athletes will all get together in one place because there's a large enough prize money. And that doesn't really make sense, right? If you look at tennis, you look at golf, there are lots of scenarios where the best athletes have enough economic incentive that they come together and they create a great showcase and people watch it. And so we think there's a broken model there, that because there isn't the incentive of prize money and indeed budgets and all the rest, you don't get the best athletes going head to head. Therefore, you don't get an interesting broadcast, right? It's a relatively simple problem, as we explained it to our investors, as you can imagine. And so looking at the back half of COVID, long answer to your question, we sort of said, is there an opportunity to showcase these athletes and put on a great show? And Daytona was an event we were already talking to. Obviously know the guys at NASCAR that are, level of professionalism so far above what most of us are used to in mass participation. I mean, their TV contracts trade for billions of dollars just for the TV rights, right? It's really, really professional. And they gave us an opportunity and said, why not come and put on a big show here? So with the caveat that, frankly, with us, you're in Indonesia there, I'm in London, it's May the 28th. We have no idea whether December will be the right time for sport. I mean, if I had to bet on a place in the world that would be safe to put on a sports event by then, Florida is built on tourism. Florida has already actually designated professional sports as key workers. I'm not sure if you knew that, but they've actually...
No, I hadn't seen that. Yeah, right.
Professionally, because they look at professional sport as so important to their economy, whether it's the teams in Miami, getting people to Orlando, et cetera, et cetera. They had the first UFC competitions just 2 weeks ago. Yeah. So UFC has really started back, right? And they did that in Florida.
Yeah.
And so we looked at it, Florida being a very safe place, and least of all from a sort of governance perspective. then secondly, where is a venue that we could in theory put on a social distancing mass race, which I mean just sounds like a joke to say that out loud, right? If we think about the dynamics of, remember your races, you know, the Singapore Marathon stuff, I mean that is packing people into a small area. So the idea that you can have social distancing races is strange, but ultimately the scenario in the world that we're working in. And so if there was any a place where we could put on a social distancing triathlon, a venue that can hold 165,000 people, probably felt like the right one, which is what Daytona Speedway can handle.
Fantastic. And you know, you're talking about Florida. I mean, there's a Spartan event that's due to happen in the next couple of weeks down there as well. So things starting to open up in there. Yeah, fantastic. Well, fingers crossed. Yeah, all the best with that. As always, time flies. Love to end on an inspirational note. And you've seen plenty of inspiring things around the traps. Something that you'd like to share with the audience that might inspire them through the remaining months of COVID?
I'll spin it around and turn it into a sales pitch. You know me, Chris. So I'm always the commercially minded person. Is that I think the amount of inspirational stories in our athletes day to day really goes unmatched. Unmatched from a triathlon perspective, certainly. So just seeing the level of athleticism that these guys put their bodies through and swim, bike, and run. And we recognize that at the PTO. So the first thing we did actually after paying the prize money out early to sort of provide support is we created an online hub called the PTO Hub, which was purely a destination for videos like this, like you and me talking now, where we would take the inspirational athletes and they could give back and essentially play it forward by inspiring people about how are they dealing with the crisis. And so for the last month, we've been creating content of just very lighthearted interviews with Jan Frodeno, Daniela Reef, Alistair Brownlee, all the superstars in the sport, and asking them the questions, how are you dealing with this? And the reason why it's inspirational is it's such a wide remit of, you've got folks that are chilling out, doing nothing, recognizing that, look, there's 4 or 5 years before I need to peak, I should take some time off. You've got others like Daniela Reef that has literally done swimming sessions in her bath where she's been in a wetsuit because she wants to be proprioception, slightly joking partly, but you know, the full mix. And so the inspiration for me is the athletes, and you can find out about them all at ptohub.org.
Fantastic. Free plug. Sam, always great to catch up. Thanks for making the time. All the best with the journey, which is obviously in its infancy, and you shared the vision at Mass Participation World in Singapore in December, and it looks amazing, and look forward to catching up in person soon and seeing the story continue. Thanks so much for making the time.
Stay safe. All the best.